recap, like Sons and Lovers was, if you're really interested in human psychology, if you're really interested in some of, like almost an application of Freud, then go for it.
The parental influence
Yes.
on a child.
The Alexandria Quartet, if you like a beautiful, dreamy, verbose,
Narcotic
type of feel, that's up your alley for you. And how would you summarize this one? Like, what would be someone's draw to that?
I would say almost like on a purely artistic / biographical interest in these incredibly famous poets, and to see the inner lives they led and their thoughts on the world and art. Channel, where we set out to explore wonderful, great works of literature
while dressed in elegant clothing,
because why the hell not? Yes. So apologies again for such a lengthy absence.
Yes, we did do a lot of reading in that time.
We did,
but
we've been busy. Yeah,
and apologize.
And today we have 3 books that we wanted to cover for you. Some things perhaps for the holiday season. A lot of people
delightfully red and holiday festive cover of Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence.
That's right. That's the first one we'll be covering. And the second one is called The Alexandria Quartet, and that's by Durrell, an Englishman or an Irishman, I don't recall. But the last one is a collection of correspondences between the famous German poet Rilke and 2 Soviet poets, one of whom we're familiar with already.
Yes.
But we'll get to that later.
We will get to that later. So we're going to just get right into it.
Okay.
Okay, so the first one is Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence.
Yes.
And I have a little bit of a synopsis here, so bear with me.
Yes,
I didn't memorize them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a 1913 novel by D.H. Lawrence, and it really looks at the emotional turbulence and conflicts of the main character, Paul Morrell, and his mother as well. Journey of Paul's upbringing, but also flips back and forth with the narration being both of the mother and of Paul, and also of his older brother William. I'd say the majority of the book mostly talks about Paul's relationships with 2 women in particular, one Miriam and the other one Clara. The story begins with the mother's tale of kind of an unhappy marriage and her disappointments, her expectations of that relationship and the disappointments of her husband being really a miner, like literally a physical person who goes down into the mines. He didn't really have a lot of ambition and drank a lot, would spend all of their savings on drinking. So it starts out with a bit of conflict and her disappointments with her husband, and then the shift of her, kind of collapse of her love for her husband to an almost smothering love for her children. And what was really fascinating about it is, as you see her state of mind during each child's birth, the personality of that child takes on some sort of meaning behind the moment she was suffering. So for example, William, who's her firstborn child, her firstborn son, when she gave birth to him, it was a first feeling of hope again after a long sense of disappointment and depression. And so it was almost as if this son gave her this new replenished sense of hope, optimism, and she just felt like the son was going to be the bright shining star, and he lived up to that expectation in a way. So he was very bubbly, very handsome, very smart, made an income very quickly, grew up the ladder and went up the ladder very fast in social climbing and as well as an income. And then her second son, Paul, during that time, they were really financially quite strapped, and this was around the time where her husband was drinking a lot and using a lot of their money, and so she actually really did not want another child. And Paul's personality during that time, even though she didn't really want the child when it was born, she was kind of melancholic, but saw this child kind of like a burden, but also for some reason she felt like somehow he saw her emotionally during that time more than any other being or creature could. And so Paul kind of grew up always being a bit melancholic, a bit sickly, and then their daughter was the third one, I believe, or maybe she was the second child in between. I don't really remember for sure. But the interesting thing is hearing all about kind of the mother's state of mind during this time, and how the sons grow up with certain expectations, but also with a certain personality because of, who knows, maybe that was, during this time, psychoanalysis and Freud's time was very popular about, the parents' influence on children's psychology was really strong, and quite honestly, a lot of blame and shame were put around parents during that time for the mentality of their children. Mm-hmm. And so you see kind of that emergence of psychoanalysis being influenced in the storytelling of this.
Exploring the inner life of these. Yeah, and of course we know, sorry, and I know you're not contributing a lot during this time, but and so, the story kind of shifts to even talking about more about what Freud was really famous for, which is, this kind of idea that a son will always have some sort of ambition to copulate or marry or have sexual desire or interest with the mother. Ooh. The mother character. The Oedipus complex.
Yes, Oedipus. Thank you for that. Yes. Everyone knows what it is, but they don't always remember the terminology.
Yeah,
so thank you.
Yeah.
And so in his selection of Miriam and Clara as his two main lovers, of Paul's main lovers, you see some of the similarities of the mother in each of them. So the pious one being Miriam, and then Clara being this kind of independent, strong, unhappy in her own unhappy marriage, and then the similarity even in William, the older son who ended up passing away in the story. The similarity between his chosen partner was he ended up choosing a wife and marrying a woman who was well beyond his social status, but she was quite not really interested in him, and that was palpable to the mother. And so they play with that idea, but I would say the biggest thing for me that I found interesting about it was, it also was mostly about the emotional turbulence as when someone falls in love with someone, like for example Paul with Miriam, and the seeds of doubt a controlling parent or family member can have on that relationship and cause chaos. And maybe that chaos would have existed without that seed of doubt, but I got the sense that, there's this element of the mother really trying to remain in possession of her children, and so she had a hard time letting go of them having not really a loving marriage. And so there was even more pressure for these kids to belong to her and to continue to be in her life. And so she would always say things like, with Miriam, she's just like, I really don't like Miriam. I think she doesn't just want you, she wants your soul in a way, because she's very pious. And so then after these comments, Paul starts to kind of waver between complete disgust and contempt towards Miriam, and then complete love and this sense of, I guess, like awe of her and her devotion. It also played a lot with the psychology of, how others when they have their opinions of you or your interests can change your own interests psychologically.
Yeah.
So sorry, that was a lot of burst of kind of information.
Yeah.
You've read this one, right?
No, I hadn't. No.
This isn't one we read together. This was one I kind of read on my own, which is why I went on a bit of a monologue there.
Yeah, I know. It's I know a little bit about D.H. Lawrence, and he has a very interesting sort of exploration of the feminine as well, and sort of kind of like an aspect in which he's a bit of a rebel. Like he kind of like rebelled against sort of the mores of the time, and he kind of expressed more of a deep chthonic, like feminine aspect of spirituality that he I think The Plumed Serpent is one of his books that are more esoteric, but he actually explores sort of the dynamics of female psychology and the earthiness of the feminine, and like he's very subtle writer.
And also not even just that, but I also think like he showed quite the diversity in characteristics of the female, and the difference between being even from the woman's perspective of being a lover versus being a mother.
Yeah.
So I would argue that it's not even just sons and lovers, it's also mothers and lovers. And
yeah, that's great. So did you want to say anything else about your thoughts on the book?
I absolutely loved it, because I think it's everything that ticks the box for me, although at times I got a bit annoyed with Paul's like idolization of the women he loved, and kind of delusion around them, and then his like hot cold. But I think you're supposed to be a bit annoyed by his wavering love in general for both the mother and for the lover. I think you're supposed to be a bit annoyed by that, but overall I felt like it was a very compelling tale. And
I feel like that same feeling that we had when we were reading Somerset Maugham's Of Human Bondage.
Yeah.
We got really annoyed with the main character there.
Yeah, it's almost like
you just want to smack him.
Yeah.
Just like wake the hell up.
Yeah, well, and that I would say that is more similar to William, like the first son's relationship, where it's like, why are you with this person? She doesn't make you happy, clearly, and he's even knows that his lover is just using him. Like he's very aware of that, but he can't leave it. There's this like sense of duty, and
so it's a deeply psychological novel.
Yeah, very.
It seems that way.
Very.
Yeah.
Okay, I would give it. Are we gonna rate it at the end or now?
Yeah, well, let's rate it now.
Okay, so Ava.
What does Ava rate it?
I would actually give it a 4.5. I'm gonna give it a solid 4.5.
That's a pretty good one.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good.
I think the psychoanalysis I actually really enjoyed, but you could tell it was like you could tell where his influence was coming from.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Fair enough.
But I quite like the writing.
Yeah.
I do like D.H. Lawrence's writing style, I find. Anyone else a D.H. Lawrence fan?
Yeah, leave a comment below.
Wow.
So, in real juxtaposition to this last one, we have one that's also similarly inspired by psychoanalysis, like Freudian psychoanalysis in a way.
Yeah.
This one's called the Alexandria Quartet by Lawrence Durrell. And so he was a British novelist, poet, and dramatist, as well as a travel writer. And he was born in 1912 in India to British parents, educated in England. And he spent most of his time in Greece, actually. He spent a lot of his time in Corfu, right? So I really, on paper, this book is amazing. It's kind of everything that
you would think you would like.
I would think, no, I like this stuff. I just wish I had, I wish I had liked it. Yeah, I wish I had liked it. I think this is one of those books you either love or you hate. So it's a tetralogy. So there's 4 books in one, and this is a very modern book. It was written between 1957 to 1960, sort of a period of like three or so years. And what he does is he bases this novel around 4 characters, and in a way, each of the books has an element of a character, like a perspective by which a series of events unfold, but they're interpreted through different lenses. And so the first 3 books are kind of like that. So the first book in the series is called Justine, and it's all based. It's during the period leading up to World War II and during periods of World War II, certain period during World War II, and it involves sort of the main narrator, who is like a schoolmaster, and he has an affair with this Jewish woman in the city of Alexandria in Egypt, and she's married to an Egyptian, Coptic Egyptian named Nassim, and essentially like this love affair is occurring, and he's kind of sleeping around with some other woman, and who happens to be like a dancer or a prostitute. And this woman comes from like a very poor background, but she's also very wealthy, and she's very, the word was like angsty.
Wealthy through marriage, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Through a marriage with a man named Nassim.
Yeah, and he uncovers a lot about her past, and she ends up having many lovers, and she wrote this book, some diaries about her experiences, and then
was it her diary, or was it
no,
someone
she had like letters and diaries,
and then
but
a man took the
but her past lover had written a book about her,
Yeah.
and so essentially this guy's uncovering more about this Justine, and it's so like he writes. So the first book apparently is written in the style of James Joyce, and if you really like Ulysses, you'll really like this book. But it's it's so internal monologue heavy. It's so dreamy. It's so sometimes, there's a sense in which it can be so overwhelmingly descriptive, and
not really much of a plot.
Yeah, and like in a way, like slightly sort of like self-indulgent, and all of the emotions, like he's trying to convey these like profound emotions and these dramatic scenes, and trying to picture like Alexandria as a city, as a human being itself, and like he's mixing all these beautiful Oriental and exotic, and
yeah, like you can almost smell the, like,
yeah, it's
you can
very
smell
sensual.
this like oozing romantic fog and the architecture.
But filthy mixed with like decadent smells and perfumes,
Yeah.
and so it's such a intoxicating, heady. It's like a heady novel, but it's done in such a. I hate to like the only word I can say, and it's probably like a bad word, but it's like, or like people might get a little bit annoyed, but it's self-masturbatory. Like there's an element in which like he's so stroking his ego.
Yeah. I also just found like as a woman, it was very difficult to listen to this like story about an obsession with a woman without her really playing any sort of role in that reflection actively.
Yeah.
Like it was just his musings about her on and on
Yeah.
and on and on.
And in a way, in a way, it's like because there are no real like scenes, like action scenes, like there's very little like dialogue interspersed in between. It's so much as memory and musings that it becomes almost like an intellectual activity, and ceases to actually have like that immediacy of that. And like, don't get me wrong, I enjoy things that are like deeply reflective, but for some reason it was too much.
It wasn't balanced.
It wasn't balanced, and it wasn't believable in many ways.
Yeah, and the way I kind of like to put it, it's like in Somerset Maugham or in like D.H. Lawrence, I do get an element of that here and there, right? Like they'll describe a scene with some, especially Somerset Maugham, which is one thing I really love it, with a romantic air to it. And there's times in there where I was really drawn into this like this haze and meditative state almost, but it was too much of that I actually lost the power of those words and the power of that imagery. It almost needed some dialogue, some break without it being too jarring of a shift. Like it would go from very, very verbose and romantic and dreamy, and then it would be like cut right to dialogue that didn't seem to flow well.
So exactly to this point, so the reason why the people draw a parallel with James Joyce is because the author deliberately chose not to present a plot in a series of sequences in time, because he argued that that's history. That's just recalling the history to have a plot very linear. So what he does is he kind of like alinearly or whatever, he would take moments in time, and you don't know whether you're in the future, in the past, in the present, and he disperses it throughout the novel. And some people enjoy that stuff. Like that's almost like a Christopher Nolan type movie, you know. But like to read it in this it was very frustrating. But like one of the things I really find intriguing about it, and it was only near the end, like almost like, you know, near the end of Justine, like already 140 something pages in, they start talking about this like secret meeting in Alexandria of these like intellectuals and, you know, shop owners who are interested in the Kabbalah, and they just kind of like, they talk about these esoteric, they mention Hermes Trismegistus and like all these different sort of like esoteric sort of occult type sort of writings. And it's kind of interspersed throughout. Each of the characters is like very much into sort of like tarot or sort of the Kabbalistic tree and mysticism of one sort or another. And then later on, there's another plot, which apparently later on in the books they develop more, is this idea of like British Secret Service kind of like subplot, which becomes more and more, because as World War II is dragging on, it becomes more and more present and more sort of in the rather peripheral story, it becomes more of the central story, right? But I just couldn't get past Justine. I couldn't go past the first book to just care about the other ones. And maybe it's unfair, maybe it's something that I needed to stick through, but I don't know, it didn't do it for me.
Yeah.
You?
So, yeah, no. I think that was very clear.
Yeah.
It wasn't my style. I'm more into like, I like elements of romanticism in the description of things, but I like psychoanalysis of human behavior and like really getting deep into the psychology of people, which I just felt like it was too idealistic and too one-sided, that it never really showed the perspective from Justine's side, that it was like, this is just one person's like lens.
But you know what, I think part of the thing was, you know, in full admission, each next book would show a different lens and a different perspective.
Okay, but then that's just too much about Justine.
Yeah.
Like, then that's just too much about one character, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
you don't buy the story. I just don't buy his love for Justine.
No, it's not love. It's like
fascination.
You know what it is? It's like It's like a muse. It's like an artist picking up a brush and pretending to be in love, or in one, like those moments in time, they exist, but they're like, right? Or they're maybe at the most for a day.
It's like a means to an end. It's like you're instrumentalizing somebody for
like
some other.
It's almost like, are you high this whole time or something like that? Like, are you literally just like delusional the whole time? Yeah. Because no one simply has. It's too false of an emotion. It's like it was too put on.
I wanted to just say one more thing. So he has two inscriptions at the beginning of the story. One is by, I believe, the Marquis de Sade, and the other one is by Freud. So another, obviously, Freudian influence here. And it says here, I am accustoming myself to the idea of regarding every sexual act as a process in which four persons are involved. We shall have a lot to discuss about that, says Freud in his letters. So hence the reason why this is like some sort of tetralogy, right? He's evoking Freudian psychoanalysis and a lot of sort of the self-absorption of people who have this like angsty sexual complexities and emotional irregularities and sort of attachment issues.
So just imagine it's this. It's like romantic writer meets Freud, and together they make a baby. Yeah. It's like literally that. It's like,
but not in a good way.
No, it's like this detached lens. It's like
Yeah.
There's this, and that's why we don't buy it. I think it's like you're so floral in your wording, but then it's very objective in your analysis. It's kind of bizarre.
Yeah, the essence is missing.
Yeah.
So I would rate this. Tell me what you'd rate this, but I'd rate this.
1, 2, 3.
3.2. Okay, she does. She. I was more generous. 3.5 is what I would give it. It's not to my taste, but you know, that being said, it has all the ingredients there. It was just like, you know, you have a cake and you have all the wonderful ingredients, and yet it just doesn't come off in the end, and you're just like, I can't eat this.
This is my advice. If you're in this like very romantic state of mind and you want to do a painting, pick up the first couple of chapters here or there, or even flip through like the middle of it, open it up, and wait for a scene to evolve, and then paint it. Like honestly, I think that would be absolutely phenomenal, because there's a lot of beautiful imagery there, and you could create something, some sort of
and
piece of art.
beautiful prose. Like he's I would say he's a good writer. It's just I don't like this
Not
type
our
of
taste.
yeah.
Not our taste. That's okay.
That's okay. Okay.
Right, let's put that on the ground. So it doesn't...
Oh, let's put it on the ground. Okay. So the final one I wanted to sort of like mention one thing that I've been reading exclusively, right?
We did exclusive together, exclusive.
Exactly. There's a structure to this video. Many people might be familiar with the German poet Rainer Maria Rilke, and he was Rilke. He's a phenomenal poet. Very popular in the late 19th century, and apparently this is what's interesting. Boris Pasternak, who wrote Dr. Zhivago, right? We've
reviewed that one.
We've reviewed that one.
Check it out.
Check it out in another video. So he was obviously, before he was a writer, he was more well known as a poet. And in fact, you know, many people have argued that his poetry is far superior to his literary works in terms of his fiction. But Pasternak, when he was younger, he was introduced through his father, who was a painter, to Rilke, who was already by this time sort of an older gentleman. And so they, as he got older, he ended up submitting a poem. He got permission to submit a poem to Rilke, and Rilke really loved his poetry. And so they started sort of a correspondence, and there was a number of letters that they sort of had sent back and forth. And Pasternak had a very good friend, very intimate relationship with another woman, another poet. So,
okay, so the theme is between these three books are lovers.
So no, there's no real sense that they were lovers. There was a very because they're all poets, they all understood one another almost implicitly. Like they had an essence connection of a deep connection of what poetry is about, what beauty is, what art is, and they had a very almost on the same frequency. And so her name was Tsvetayeva. And she's also a very famous Russian poet, especially during the Soviet Union. She was well known. So she was stuck in exile, kind of in a way. She was stuck in the Soviet Union, and I believe Pasternak is Ukrainian, so he was also in the area, and they were corresponding with Rilke, who was living in a chateau, almost a 13th century.
That's so neat.
Yeah, 13th century castle that was kind of he rented out, and he was living in kind of isolation while all the sort of the world is in turmoil, right? And he's poetically in his ivory tower in a way, composing sort of the most finest verses that humanity has kind of created, right? To kind of give expression to its highest ideals, but also its deepest pains, right? And so a lot through the letters, Tsvetayeva actually got really super obsessive with Rilke. She super adored him, right? Super adored, it's not very good English, but she really admired him. And she always had this very high-flown romantic idealism, right? And there was always this sense in her poetry and in her own personal existential philosophy of this ecstasy that brings you to death, right? And to almost a tragic union where Eros and Thanatos mix, right? And you die, right? And she ended up killing herself.
Oh, God.
So she was, but so all
It's
of
not a very happy Christmas.
no, perhaps not. But so anyway, so Rilke was actually when they were communicating, he was very ill. Like he was also dying from cancer, I believe, and he wanted to talk to her more about his own illnesses and sort of the weightiness of the everyday and his basic struggles, right? And she wanted nothing to do with that. And so he got a little bit, he got annoyed with her high-flown romanticism and just talking about just sort of the idealized, sort of like philosophical, spiritual, like uplifting sort of ideas, right? And he wanted to she didn't want to hear about the earthy, bodily troubles that he was having, right? So he actually stopped communicating with her near the end, right? And so, but throughout sort of the writings, there's a sense in which they saw him as almost like the first poet. And in a way, what they're kind of like alluding to is like this Greek notion of Orpheus. And Orpheus was this sort of like legendary figure who would play on the lute or play on the sort of harp string, and he would, through his singing and through his music, he would enchant nature and the natural world. And he even descended to the underworld to try to recover his lost lover from the depths, right? And so he had this magical, evocative, poetic power. So in a sense, like, if you want to think of a god of the poets, it's Orpheus. He's kind of like the mythological figure of poetry, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, so they saw this as Rilke, and so they deeply, deeply admired him. And so anyway, there's this book here is The Letters, Summer 1926, and just pretty much it's an epistolary sort of book, and it just like showcases, like, it puts it in a chronology, so you know what's happening at the time in each person's life, and you could just read the letters translated to English. And it's very nice, especially if you enjoy poetry you're familiar with these poets. You can get like a little bit of a backstory for them and see what they were thinking about art and poetry and the nature of sort of life and spirit and all in that. So it's a good book. I'll give it 4 out of 5. I would rate it 4 out of 5.
Oh, what made it not a 5?
I think it could get a little bit tedious at times to see someone so like fawning over another. Like, I understand, like, poets are they work almost on another level than every other human being. Like, there's an ethereality to them, right? Or groundedness, but whatever, they're not exactly in the human relations. There's something slightly outside of the human that they're always in touch with, right? And so every feeling is amplified. Every word has 1,000 different connotations and associations. So in their world, it's hard to get into that mindset, when someone's so adoring of another person. If you're not a poet yourself, you can't understand the intricacies or the subtleties of what they're referring to or why the hype is as it is, right? Like, you can appreciate a poet, but another poet, it takes literally another poet to truly appreciate the inner intricacies of another fellow poet. And so it can be a little bit like, okay, we've heard enough about your glorifying of this, of Rilke. Rilke's, unbelievable, but I'm sure as just a common reader, you miss a lot of the essence of that praise, where it's coming from, and it can kind of be a little bit like tiring.
Yeah. So I guess there's an element of like, through each of the books, there was a bit of drawing out of certain things a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Mm-hmm. But that has its place too, right?
I mean, every book, I guess, to some degree.
Yeah.
Does, but
unless we start reading Ernest Hemingway or something, with like bare sentences, bare minimum description of anything, and then you just get straight to the point,
right?
Which has its own faults, perhaps. But
yeah. So I guess as a recap, like, Sons and Lovers was, if you're really interested in human psychology, if you're really interested in some, like, almost an application of Freud, then go for it.
The parental influence on a child.
The Alexandria Quartet, if you like a beautiful, dreamy, verbose, narcotic type of feel that's up your alley for you? And how would you summarize this one? Like, what would be someone's draw to that?
I would say almost like on a purely artistic / biographical interest in these incredibly famous poets, and to see the inner lives they led and their thoughts on the world and art.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. We hope this was a satisfying video, and we do wish you have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year. Just insert whatever and have happy in front of it. And we wish you all the best. And we will see you in 2023.
Happy Yuletide.
Yes, Yuletide. Yes, or Saturnalia or whatever.
Okay.
Whatever
Ready?
you worship the new gods or the old gods.
Whatever you do, or if you worship them, just enjoy your time.
All right. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.